Bismillah, walhamdulillah, wassalatu wassalamu ala ashraf al-anbiya'i wal-mursaleen, nabiyyina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa man ittaba' hudahu ila yawmiddin, thumma amma ba'du. Okay, so ikhwan wa akhawat, we're going to start off. Oh, okay, thank you. Jazakumullah. Okay, we're going to start off the class with a review of the Arabic letters. And I do believe we are right here. So now, remember, now we're going into the second vowel sound, which is the kasra, right? And the kasra makes what type of sound?
E sound.
An E sound, okay. And we have, before we go to new letters, let's look at the ones we covered last week. Okay, so just really quick, who can tell me what this letter is?
Seen.
C. How do you say sin with the kasra underneath it? C. Okay, and Sheikh Ulysses, what letter is this?
Calf.
The calf. Not cough, calf.
Calf.
Calf, right? And how do you say calf with the kasra underneath it?
Calf.
Key.
Key.
Yes. And go ahead, Miss. Back there, what letter is this? The yeah, and how do you say yeah with the kasra underneath it? Ye. Okay, that's good. And go ahead, Mukhtar.
That's is it a Hamza?
The Hamza, how do you say Hamza with the kasra underneath it? E. And last, Ulysses, what's that?
Ba.
Abba. And how do you say Abba with the kasra underneath it?
Ba.
B.
B.
So we have B,
B.
E, Ye, Ki, C. Okay, so that was from last week.
The Hamza.
Mhm.
The Hamza, it's another letter for the Hamza as well.
See, the thing is with the Hamza, it takes a lot of different shapes. So, right now, the Hamza that we're using is the Hamza either on an Aleph or underneath the Aleph. But you'll also see the Hamza on a Waw and a Hamza on a Ya.
Yeah, okay.
You know, so it takes different shapes, and there's a lot of rules actually to the Hamza, and learn those rules when we get into more dictation and things like that, inshallah. But, you know, what's the most important thing is not what you see with the Hamza, but if you see this mark right here, this doesn't change. This little, the way that this looks, that doesn't change. But what you see with it will. So as long as you see this, you know it's a Hamza. Okay.
Wait, guys, do you need a napkin for the bathroom?
So now let's look at the 4 new letters that we have here. Okay, Zakiya, what letter is this? That's a Ain. And how do you say a Ain with a kasra underneath it? Ay, that's right. Ay, like Inda or Ibadah, right? Ibadah or Inda is with this Ain. Okay, the next letter that we have is, what is this, Afifa? Huh? What letter is this? Fa. Right, and how do you say a fa with a kasra underneath it? Fi. Okay. And Miss, what letter is this? Ta. Okay, how do you say ta with a kasra underneath it? Pi. Pi. That's he. Pi. Pi. Okay, so you have pi. Okay, and the next one, Ulysses, you know what this one is?
That's the Ka.
That's right, it's the ha.
Ha. The Ha.
No, ha. Yeah. So this is the ha. Now, how do you say a ha with a kasra underneath it?
Ka.
Khi.
K.
Khi.
K.
So we have khi, pi, fi, I. Khi, pi, fi, I. All right, so with that being said, we're going to move on. If there aren't any questions regarding this, any questions about the words? the letters, how to say them, which one? The
Say the
second,
third one. What's
the third one is the fa. Right, this one right here,
Right.
and that's the fa. And the fa makes the feet sound, right? Feet, fa. Okay. So these are the four letters that you should study and try to have memorized and have down by the next class. Bidnillahi Jalla Jalaluhu. Okay, so with that being said, let's move on now to Usul Tafsir, which I don't have up. Where's the Usul Tafsir? Here we go. So in Usul Tafsir, we have reached, and we finished Tartib al-Quran and the rulings about the order of the Quran. But before we move on to the next subject in the fundamentals of Tafsir, what did we say about the three? What are the three issues discussed when we talk about the order of Quran or of the Quran, and what are the rulings of each issue? Okay, so let's start with the first one. When we talk about the words in the Quran and the order of the words in the Quran. And that's the first thing we covered. And what did we say about that?
It's not permissible to change the order.
That's correct. We cannot change the order of the words. It is not permissible to change the order of the words. Okay, the second issue that we discussed is what? The verses, right? Okay,
Order of verses.
the order of the verses. And what did we say about the order of the verses?
Not
You can't,
permissible
right?
to
You
change.
can't change it, but this is the correct opinion. That means there are some people that say that you can change the order of the verses, but the correct opinion is that you cannot.
So when you talk about order, so if you're reciting,
Mhm.
so you can't, like, you would say, you recite the 255th verse,
Mhm.
and then it's not good to jump to the 236th verse after you say the 255th?
That's,
what you're
yeah,
talking-
okay. Exactly. All right, so that's with the verses. Now, after that, we talked about what's the third subject?
Surah.
The surah, the order of the surahs. And we said about that it is
Permissible.
permissible to recite the surahs out of order. It's permissible, okay? Now, the sunnah is, though, when we're talking about the sunnah of the Khalifas, right? The sunnah of Uthman, he had placed the Quran in a certain order, so it is highly liked or encouraged to recite it in that order and stuff like that, but it is not, there's nothing impermissible about it. So you can recite Surah Al-Fil before you recite Surah Al-Baqarah or Surah Al-Ma'idah or A'raf or anything like that. Okay, so that's what we covered last class. And we also talked about the different stages of the Quran being recorded. You know, what happened during the time of Abu Bakr, what happened during the time of Umar, and what happened during the time of... Okay, so that was the last thing we covered. Oh, no, I'm sorry, we also covered about the word tafsir as well, right? What is tafsir? Right, so that, that explains why we use the word tafsir. We also stated that the word tafsir is used only for the explanation of the Quran. And we don't use it for explanation of hadith. The word for explanation of hadith or anything is sharh. That's right. Okay, so we did that. Okay. We covered the proofs about the ruling regarding tafsir and that is obligatory for us to know tafsir. Allah said, أَفَلَا يَتَدَبَّرُونَ الْقُرْآنَ. Do they not ponder over the Quran? Right, so Allah is telling us that the Quran was made for us to think about its meanings and its rulings and things like that and try to understand them. So that is a ruling of the Quran, and I'm not the Quran, but the tafsir of the Quran. The reason why we're learning tafsir is so that we can understand it. The reason why we try to understand the Quran is so that we can implement it and know what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants and instructs us with. Okay, so in order for us though to understand the Quran, before we can get to that, that's why we're studying usul tafsir, or the fundamentals of tafsir. Okay. Now we're going to talk about al-wajib al-muslimi tafsir al-Quran, which is obligations that are linked or connected to the Muslims when it comes to interpretation or explanation of the Quran. Okay, so the first thing, number one, says having the sense that he is interpreting the words of Allah. This is one thing that we have to understand. We talk about the tafsir of the Quran. We have to understand that we are interpreting the words of Allah. Okay? And by doing so, we are attesting to the intent of what Allah means. So we're saying that Allah means this. Okay? So, he should fear saying anything without knowledge, then falling into that which Allah has made impermissible, and would be held accountable for it on the day of resurrection. Allah says in the Quran, قُلْ إِنَّمَا حَرَّمَ رَبِّي الْفَوَاحِشَ مَا ظَهَرَ مِنْهَا وَمَا بَطَنَ وَالْإِثْمَ وَالْبَغْيَ بِغَيْرِ الْحَقِّ وَأَن تُشْرِكُوا بِاللَّهِ مَا لَمْ يُنَزِّلْ بِهِ سُلْطَانًا وَأَن تَقُولُوا عَلَى اللَّهِ مَا لَا تَعْلَمُونَ. So Allah says in the Quran, in Surah Al-A'raf, verse 33, he says that, say, O Prophet Muhammad, say, my Lord has only forbidden immoralities, what is apparent of them and what is concealed, and sin and oppression without right, and that you associate with Allah that for which he has not set down any authority, and that you say about Allah that which you do not know. So this was one of the things that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has made it permissible that we say about Allah that which we do not know. And we fall into that when we make tafsir, when we make interpretation of the Quran not based upon knowledge. Okay. Allah also says, وَيَوْمَ الْقِيَامَةِ تَرَى الَّذِينَ كَذَبُوا عَلَى اللَّهِ وُجُوهُهُمْ مَسْوَدَّةٌ أَلَيْسَ فِي جَهَنَّمَ مَثْوًى لِلْمُتَكَبِّرِينَ. Allah also says in the Quran, and on the day of resurrection, you will see those who lied about Allah, right, with their faces blackened. Is there not in hell a residence for the arrogant? All right, and this actually brings something to mind too. The word, their face being blackened. So actually, it was a funny situation that happened more than once actually, but this was someone that my sister knew who said, who asked the question, why do black people become Muslims when the Quran talks so negatively about them? And they use verses like this to show the Quran talking negatively about someone who's black. It says here that the people that are going to lie, they're black faced, right? And I had to explain to the person that this is not, and this is why it's important for us to understand the religion in totality and not just take one text and not look at the whole picture. We know that the Prophet ﷺ life, his life alone negates this type of understanding. Bilal was one of the people that he said, "Inni sami'tu khashkhashatak fil jannah." He says, I heard the sound, your rustling, or the sounds of your footsteps in paradise. And we know that Bilal, radiallahu anhu, was of African descent. Okay? This is talking about a state and not an actual physical attribute. But darkness is used to express gloom, express negative feelings and state and emotion. And this is what is meant here.
It's like a figure of speech.
Yes. Okay. Okay, now that we've discussed that issue, the issue of what we have to think about when we try to or attempt to give tafsir or interpret the words of Allah, Jalla Jalaluh, we're now going to move on to another subject, which is al-marji' fi tafsir al-Quran, which means references for explaining the Quran. So now that we know that we cannot explain the Quran without knowledge, where do we go when we want to know the meaning of Allah in the Quran? So, the first place we go, it says here, explaining the Quran with Quran. We look in the Quran for the meaning of the Quran. You know, different verses would explain other verses, right? Because Allah knows best what He means. So that makes sense. Is there anyone that doesn't believe that Allah knows best, or anyone else, really, that fact, that the person who is talking knows more about what he means with his words than anyone else? Does anyone dispute that fact? I'm hoping no one does. That'd be kind of weird. Okay, all right, so this is logical and sound, that we explain the Quran using the Quran itself, because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows what He means. Example of that, Allah says, ألا إن أولياء الله لا خوف عليهم ولا هم يحزنون. Allah says about the awliya of Allah, right? Those people who are allies of Allah, He says that there will be no fear concerning them, nor will they grieve, or nor will they be saddened, depending on how you want to translate that word. All right, so what does this mean? Who are those people? It's explained, right? The verse that comes after it. Allah says, الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا وَكَانُوا يَتَّقُونَ. Those who believed and were fearful of Allah. So those are the awliya. If you want to know who the awliya of Allah are, who are the allies of Allah, what does that word mean when Allah talks about His allies? He explains, those who believed and had taqwa, right? Those who believed and those who were righteous, God-fearing people. Those are the allies of Allah, Jalla fi'ula. Okay. Another example. Allah says in the Quran, وَمَا أَدْرَاكَ مَا الطَّارِقُ. Right? In Surah Al-Tariq, Allah says, and what will tell you the meaning or that which is a tariq. All right, it says, or what it says here, and what can make you know what is the night comer, right? So he explains it in the next verse when he says, An-Najmu Thaqib. An-Najmu Thaqib, which means it is the piercing star, or the shooting star, depending on how you want to. So we understand the word tariq, because the tariq linguistically, if you were to leave it alone like that, you'll be left to maybe interpret that linguistically, because a tariq is something that it knocks. So like, okay, all right, what is Allah saying here? What is a tariq? What knocks? What protrudes? What makes a sound? What's going on? Right, so Allah explains it. He says that He's talking about a najmu thaqib, a shooting star. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala explains what is intended by His words. Okay, so after the words of Allah explaining the words of Allah, we have the second reference point, and that is explaining the Quran with Sunnah. Explaining the Quran with Sunnah. Because the Messenger of Allah, relays from Allah. Right? So he is the most knowledgeable in regards to the intent of Allah and his speech. So it makes sense that the person who can better explain what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying other than himself, Jalla Jalalu, is the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu wa sallamuhu alayhi. Example of that, Allah says, وَأَعِدُّوا لَهُمْ مَسْتَطَعْتُمْ مِنْ قُوَّةٍ. And that means, and prepare against them whatever you are able of power. Right? Talking about the fighting the disbelievers. So the explanation, the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he explained this as being archery. That means learning how to shoot, learning how to ride horse, learning how to defend yourself. Right? So he explains what this means, the power means here. Right? And this explanation is recorded by Muslim on the narration of Uqba ibn Amir. Now the third step. Okay, once we try to explain Allah's word using Allah's speech, and then explaining Allah's word using the explanation of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, then we go to number 3, which is explaining the Quran with the statement of the companions, especially the knowledgeable ones who specialize in explaining the Quran. All right, we have companions, 2 in particular, that were known for their explanation of the Quran. Who are they? 2 of the most famous. Don't give me a third-rate companion when it comes to explanation. Talking about first-rate, 2 of them.
Aisha.
No.
Abu Bakr.
No. Come on, guys, this should be really easy.
Uthman.
Ibn Abbas.
Ibn Abbas is one of them, if not considered number 1. All right, but who's a close second? Uthman, no.
No, Abu Hurairah narrated a lot.
He narrated a lot. That's his field. His field is narration, but explanation of the Quran is somebody else's. Let's say I'll give you a hint. His name is Abdullah. If that's much of a hint. So many Abdullahs amongst the companions, though. But who?
Ibn Mas'ud.
That's right. Abdullah ibn Mas'ud. Abdullah ibn Mas'ud is known for his explanation of the Quran. Okay. In fact, he's the one when it was, we're not going to mention that. I don't want to confuse too many people right now. Okay, so anyway, so let's look here now. Right, the example says, إن كنتم مرضى أو على سفر أو جاء أحد منكم من الغائط أو لمستم النساء. Right, so here in this ayah 43 of Surah Ma'idah, it says, and if you are ill or on a journey, this is talking about a person who is not in a state of purity, right? If you are ill or on a journey, or one of you comes from the place of relieving himself, or you have contact with women. Okay. So it has been authentically reported that Ibn Abbas explained that contact here is talking about intercourse. And not just because some people actually explain it as actually touching a woman. So if you touch a woman, some of the scholars say that breaks your wudu. No, I'm not going to tell you guys that one. That's a little, I remember when I was at the beginning of my seeking knowledge, I think maybe my second year in the university, and we're with one of the scholars, and it was a class similar to this, but actually it was a class dealing with fiqh. And it was question time. Most of the people that sat in this class were from the West. And the way that we think about things and what we deem to be okay in certain settings is different than what other people, think. And there's nothing wrong with that. Every society, they have their own standards and things like that. Okay, so one of the brothers from Britain, he asked the sheikh, What do you do if you made wudu before you went to the masjid and you touched your wife's private part before you went to the masjid, right? You made wudu, touched your wife's private part, then you want to go to the masjid. So what's the ruling in that? Huh? No, no, he didn't validate. He says, why would you touch your wife's private part after you made wudu? Why? Now, that's where the sheikh is coming from, being where he's from and stuff like that. I guess to him, he can't even imagine that someone would do that, cause you make wudu to prepare yourself for worship, right? But it happens. You could want to prepare yourself for worship, and at the same time, your wife might be looking, quite attractive at that time, and you want to get physical, and one thing leads to another, ABC, and so forth. So, the shaykh answered the question, but he just he went really off the wall, and I just thought it was so funny how we view issues differently. And this goes back to this ayah right here, where some of the scholars, they view the touching of the woman to mean touching her, while some of them mean actual sexual relations. And we have the explanation of Ibn Abbas, which is kind of the ammo that is used for the scholars that say no, this is talking about sexual relations. Ibn Abbas, who is one of the top explainers of the Quran, said that that's what it means. Okay. So after the explanations of the companion, where do we look for, or where do we go when we want to know the intent of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala behind his word, or the meanings of his words in the Quran? So we go to step number 4, which is explaining the Quran with the statement of the students of the companions. Because the students of the companions are the best of the people after the companions. And they don't fall into desires as much as the people that came after them. So what's meant by that is that, we hope that what they're saying based upon intellect, or based upon knowledge, and not based upon desires. That's what's meant here. There's a more likely that that's it. Because some people, they like to explain things based upon how they feel. But we're hoping that we escape that because of them being the best generation after the companions, right? Also, the Arabic language is another reason why we do it, right? The first is about their intent. The second reason is about the Arabic language, right? The Arabic language hasn't changed a lot during their time, so their explanation should be closer to the truth. So that means that the Arabic language has changed, and it continues to change. Any living language changes. That's part of language, right? What was a word back then is no longer a word now. New words go in, old words go out. Old words, the meaning changes to fit more newer meaning, and so forth. Okay, so what did Shaykh al-Islam Ibn Taymiyyah says? Rahimahullah, he says, whoever deviates from the way of the companions and their students' interpretation of the Quran to that which contradicts it. Now, it's not just deviating and coming up with something else that not necessarily contradicts it, but is not in line with it. This is talking about contradiction, right? Contradiction has erred in that, right? They've made a mistake, so they have fallen into error. Rather, the individual is an innovator, even if he is of the level of one who can derive rulings and his mistakes are forgiven. So we know that the person who reaches the level where his efforts that he makes to derive rulings and things like that, even if he's wrong, Allah rewards him for his effort. Allah doesn't reward him because he's wrong, but Allah rewards him for his effort. But if he's correct, he gets 2 rewards, one for being right and one for the effort in trying to reach that correct understanding. So it says that even that person in that situation and stuff like that was to do that he would be seriously wrong to contradict. That means he has this information, right? He knows what the companions say, he knows what their student says, and he goes against that. That's another thing too. So this person goes against it, even though he's a person that's reached a level where he can derive certain rulings, knowing what the companions and their students say, he goes against it. This person is not only in error, he is considered an innovator for doing that. But notice how it's based upon knowledge. I mean, if he's ignorant of that fact, that's something else. He didn't know that the companions or the students say that was their opinion, that issue, that's something else. Okay. And we're not done. See how many levels there is to this. So after the explanation of the students of the companion, we go to 5, which is Islamic meaning, which a word has, or its linguistic meaning, depending on the context. So these are 2 things that are considered equal. Either the Islamic meaning or meaning of the word, the linguistic meaning of the word, according to the context of that word, that in which that word is used in the Quran. Let's take an example of that. إِنَّا أَنزَلْنَا إِلَيْكَ الْكِتَابَ بِالْحَقِّ لِتَحْكُمَ بَيْنَ النَّاسِ بِمَا أَرَاكَ اللَّهُ وَلَا تَكُنْ لِلْخَائِنِينَ خَصِيمًا. Right? So what does Allah says here? Allah says, indeed, we have revealed to you, O Muhammad, the book in truth, so you may judge between the people. Okay. Are you guys, is that food? That food? What is it? It's grapes and strawberries. I don't know, there was a new ruling, I guess, inside the Masjid, I don't know what you want to call it, that said that, eating inside the Musalla area is not allowed. But I don't know about that. Grapes and strawberries that seem kind of harmless. So I'm going to back out of that. Just relaying a message to you, what they said to me. Okay. I don't know, Mukhtar, if you want to jump in. That's okay. All right. Just letting you guys know. Okay. So anyway. Okay. So here we have the ayah in which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He says, we have revealed to you, O Muhammad, the book in truth, so you may judge between the people by that which Allah has shown you. And do not be for the deceitful an advocate. Right? And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala also says, إِنَّا جَعَلْنَاهُ قُرْآنًا عَرَبِيًّا لَعَلَّكُمْ تَعْقِلُونَ. Allah says that, and indeed we have made it, meaning the Quran, an Arabic Quran that you might understand, right? And then Allah also says, وَمَا أَرْسَلْنَا مِنْ رَسُولٍ إِلَّا بِلِسَانِ قَوْمِهِ لِيُبَيِّنَ لَهُمْ فَيُضِلُّ اللَّهُ مَنْ يَشَاءُ وَيَهْدِي مَنْ يَشَاءُ وَهُوَ الْعَزِيزُ الْحَكِيمُ. And this means, and we did not send any messenger except speaking in the language of his people to state clearly to them. And Allah sends astray thereby whom He wills and guides whom He wills, and He is the exalted in might, the wise. Now this is an issue right here in itself, right? This verse itself really needs a tafsir because the nation people, they use this. And also, I think some of the water theaters as well. And they say that, I know with the nation, they say, for example, they say Elijah Muhammad, he's our messenger. He came, spoke our language and stuff, just like what the Quran says here. All right? But there's a problem with that. This is why it's not good to just take one text. Because we know that the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam is the last prophet, the last messenger. Okay? And from his names, the name of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam has a lot of names, right? Mustafa. From one of his names is Al-Aqib, which means the last. Right? So there are going to be no more. So even if you have that understanding, we know that this understanding stops with the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Right? So this is an issue. So I know that for some of the Warifdeeners, what they do now, they don't use this. They use the hadith about the Mujaddid, the what do you call it? The reformer. Yes, right. The reformer, and this one can apply. There's nothing wrong with that, right? Because a reformer is supposed to come at the I think every 500 years or something like that. And that could apply to someone. Now, it could be argued, though, whether or not that applies to a specific individual or not. But that hadith in itself is correct, and that understanding is correct. You know, some people are going to say, no, this applies to my sheikh and not yours. Now, that's something else. That's another issue, but yeah. Okay, so, here it says, so if the Islamic meaning differs from the linguistic, right? We have the linguistic meaning of a word, and we have the Islamic meaning, and they're different. They don't mean the same thing. So the Islamic meaning is referred to. We go back to the Islamic meaning, and we do not take the linguistic meaning, if they differ, right? That is because the Quran was revealed to clarify the legislation and not to clarify linguistics, right? Except that there is proof to the contrary. So, now this is really this type of principle here. We're now getting into qawaid, or what's known as fundamentals of fiqh and fundamentals of usul al-fiqh. Right? We're getting into a lot of these fundamentals now, and we're gonna get exceptions a lot. You're gonna see this word, like for example, an example of that in usul al-fiqh, in the fundamentals of fiqh. An example of that would be al-amr yaqtadi al-wujub. That when Allah and His Messenger commands us with something, it means it's obligatory. That's a principle. Illa idha yasrifuhu sar, except that there is something to the contrary. There's something to support that that's not the intent. But if there's nothing to support that that's not the intent, then it remains upon its foundation, which is that if Allah or His Messenger says to do something, that means it's obligatory for us to do it. Okay, so we're going to see that when we study more, we're going to see this exception to the rule thing, and we have to pay attention to that, because there are what differentiates between a person that has learned and a person that has understanding is this: when do we apply the exceptions? When do we apply that? Okay. Okay, so the example is what Allah says about the hypocrites. I guess I didn't finish that. Oh, that's weird. Thought I had like 4 months of notes here. What happened? I don't know. We went through the whole thing. Okay, so that's that then. We'll let's have to continue that at another time. But what we want to do, though, we want to get through that book as much as possible off that, so we can start getting into tafsir. But we can't get into tafsir until we've covered the fundamentals of tafsir. And there's more than one book dealing with the fundamentals of tafsir, but I believe this one to be the most concise in dealing with what I feel that we need to cover before we actually jump into a book of tafsir. So yeah, we're going to cover more than one chapter. Like this class, we cover how many chapters? Like three chapters. Normally in a class, we cover one. So with that being said, we're going to cover now something small from the issue dealing with fiqh, and then we'll close class like that. So. I mean, it's Isha, we can delay. We were going to close up, wrap it up, and then we can pray, inshallah. Unless you have to go?
No, we gotta go.
Okay, khalas, then We'll pray inshallah and then continue after the salat.
الله أكبر الله أكبر أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله أشهد أن محمدا رسول الله حي على الصلاة حي على الفلاح قد قامت الصلاة قد قامت الصلاة الله أكبر لا إله إلا الله.
All people up in here, man. I don't want to be directly behind you. It's going to be over here.
الله أكبر. الحمد لله رب العالمين الرحمن الرحيم مالك يوم الدين إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين آمين. ويل لكل همزة لمزة الذي جمع ماله وعددا يحسب أن ماله أخلدا كلا لينبذن في الحطمة وما أدرك ما الحطمة نار الله المقابت التي تتبين على الأفئدة إنها عليهم مصدى بأمد ممددا. الله أكبر. سمع الله لمن حمده ربنا لك الحمد. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الحمد لله رب العالمين الرحمن الرحيم مالك يوم الدين إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين آمين. قل أعوذ برب الفلق من شر ما خلق ومن شر غاسق إذا وقب ومن شر النافثات في العقد ومن شر حاسد إذا حسد. الله أكبر. سمع الله لمن حمده ربنا لك الحمد. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. سمع الله لمن حمده أكبر. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الله أكبر سمع الله لمن حمده الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته السلام عليكم ورحمة الله
Okay, Bismillah, walhamdulillah, wassalatu wassalamu ala rasulillah wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa man wala. Before we go on to the next subject, it's always important every now and then to talk about fa'idah. And what I mean by the benefit of going over something. Like for example, we studied these levels, I guess you can say, of interpreting the Quran, using Quran to interpret Quran, using Sunnah to interpret Quran, using statements of the companions to interpret Quran, using statements of the students of the companion to interpret Quran, using Islamic terminologies or linguistics to interpret Quran. What's the benefit of knowing these levels? The benefit of knowing these levels will come in when we have contradictions or different opinions. Okay, one person is using, for example, the statement of a student of companion, the other one is using the statement of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, right? And one is saying go east, the other one is saying go west. In a situation like that where it's clear contradiction, meaning there's no way you can somehow, put those two together and they can coincide equally. You have to do away with one. In a scenario like that, the one that you would do away with would be the statement of the student of the companion. And you can't take that over the statement of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And it's kind of interesting because I remember, I was trying not to be too long. I was listening to a tape of Sheikh Al-Albani. Now, Sheikh Al-Albani is considered to be one of the, back in maybe about 20 years ago or so, one of the biggest scholars, especially in the field of hadith of our time. Now, he was arguing with some scholars. Now, Sheikh Al-Albani, he's not from the Middle East. He's originally from Albania. That's why his name is Albani. And he's actually his father was a scholar, and he studied most of his time with his father, and his father was from the school of thought of the Hanafi school of thought. But the Sheikh, he prided himself of adhering to the hadith. Now, he's not very much into school of thoughts like his father was. So there was an issue that he was arguing with the other scholars of Saudi Arabia about, and specifically the main scholar was arguing with him was actually one of the sheikh that I studied with, Sheikh Abdul Muhsin Al-Abad, who's considered one of the biggest scholars in Medina. Now he's still alive, alhamdulillah, even though now he's blind. May Allah preserve him. So the issue was about fasting on Saturday. Right? So So Sheikh Al-Albani was saying it's permissible to fast on Saturdays. The other scholars say that you can't fast on Saturdays unless you fast a day before it or after it. Now, where did they get that from? Why did they say you can't fast on Saturday unless you fast a day before it or after it? The statement of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. He said that you can't fast on Saturday unless you fast a day before it or after it. But no, Friday and Saturday. Friday and Saturday. There's one for Saturday as well. Now, Sheikh Al-Albani, he says that you can. And he used for that the actions of a companion. Not the statement, but the actions of a companion to substantiate that. Now, the scholars would say, but we have here the statement of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So Sheikh Al-Albani, he would respond by saying, do you think that the companion of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam will go against his statement? So this shows its permissibility. But they're saying no, but this contradicts what the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam said. The Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam said you can do it. It says, no, the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam said you can't do it. He said, but this companion do it, which shows that it's permissible. And this goes on and on. So now you as a person now that's looking at these two statements, right? The statement of Sheikh Al-Albani versus the statements of the basically majority of scholars, specifically the ones in Saudi Arabia. And the only proof, whenever they ask them, what's your proof to substantiate that that's the intent behind this companion statement, he said that he would not do something that contradict the statement of the Prophet ﷺ. It says, how do you know that this is what he did? You know, this is why how do you know that this is why he gave or instructed the people to do? Right? So we know that this companion, he did this. But we don't know if he instructed the people to do it. That was it. So Sheikh Al-Albani would say, do you think that he would do something and not instruct the people to do the same thing? So, you know, the intellect of the Sheikh is very sharp. You know, and his arguments are very, very strong. But that is why in issues like this, we have to go back to those fundamentals. Like this right here, right? We know that the statement of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam precedes and is over any statement that contradicts it from those other than him. So the statement of the companions, you cannot use that to contradict the statement of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. The statement of the sons of the companion, you cannot use it to contradict the statement of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi. And we're going to use that same principle when it comes to hadiths. But we'll when that time comes, we'll get into the specifics of that. Bi'idhnillahi jalla jalaluh. Okay. Now, we covered in fasting, right, the fact that niyyah or intention is a condition of the fast for Ramadan. And we've stated that the Sheikh here, he says, or he's of the opinion that you have to have intentions for every day of Ramadan. Right, or every night, I should say, because the intentions is made in the night, right before you start fasting. We also talked about the definition of fasting. What does fasting or Sawm or Siyam, as it's called in Arabic, what does that mean linguistically? Who can tell me? Who remembers? Linguistically, what does Sawm mean? To abstain, right? In English, it's to abstain. In Arabic, what's the word that means abstain in Arabic? Imsak. Imsak. Right? So to abstain. Now, in the Quran, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala uses the word Sawm, and it doesn't mean what we understand from the word Sawm when we were talking about Maryam. Right, Maryam said that she would fast, right? And the fasting here is calling to withhold, to abstain, but abstain not from food, but from what? Speech, right? The same thing that Zechariah did too as well. Zechariah fasted saying that he would not speak to the people except for using sign language. Or signs, I should say sign language, because I'm pretty sure it wasn't what we consider sign languages. And stuff, yeah, okay. So we talked about the definition then, or the definition of fasting as a terminology, right? And we say it's imsak عن جميع المفطرات من طلوع الفجر الصادق إلى غروب الشمس. Okay, we have it here translated. We talked about what the Fajr as-Sadiq is, you know, the true Fajr. There's the false Fajr, which is a bright light that you see in the sky. It's very difficult to see, I guess, in such a urban city area. But if you're out in like the country, you can see it like maybe about 20 minutes or so before Fajr actually comes in, 30 minutes before Fajr actually comes in. There's a bright light in the sky, and then it disappears. And then it disappears. And then you start to see the actual Fajr, the light of Fajr coming in and stuff. That bright light of Fajr, that when that comes in, the Ibn Ummi Maktoum, he's the one that does the adhan for the false Fajr. And this is to alert people that Fajr is coming in, those who are fasting or eating the suhoor, for them to stop and things like that, get ready for prayer. And those who are making tahajjud, for them to stop, eat, get ready for prayer, if they're planning on fasting. Then Bilal, he's the one that makes the adhan for the true Fajr. So there